أهلا وسهلا فيكم ببدوي تريد. اليوم عندنا نقل مباشر لجيروم باول والاف او ام سي ميتينج. أهلا وسهلا بالجميع. خلينا دقيقة بس، خليني أحضر. كيف الجميع؟ كيف الشباب والصبايا؟ هلا طلع قرار الفيدرالية، وكان القرار بتثبيت الفايدة. تثبيت الفايدة بالرقم اللي كنا متوقعينه، يعني كل العالم كانت متوقعة تثبيت الفايدة، وهذا اللي صار. آه، الأسعار حاليا ثابتة، ما في تحرك كبير يعني للأسعار. رح نزل على 5 دقايق. جيروم باول رح يحكي بعد 12 دقيقة. إذا عم تسألوا أي ساعة رح يحكي جيروم باول، 12 دقيقة وبيحكي. عادة ما بطلع على تشارت الوقت القليل إلا إذا كنا عم نعمل في شيء مباشر، يعني مثل قرار مهم مثل جيروم باول. ليه؟ لأنه هيك فيني أشوف التغيرات لحظة بلحظة. قوة الدولار الأمريكي شفناها قبت كثير على عقب القرار، ولكن هلا عم ترتد. بعد اجتماع الاف او ام سي ميتينج عادة بنشوف تلاعب شوي بالاسعار. لذلك اذا عم تتداولوا انتبهوا، ضروري تنتبهوا من مخاطر تعملوا ليكويديشن. بس لكم مرحبا، نحن ناطرين في 10 دقائق. كيف الجميع؟ مساء الخير، مساء النور. والخلف فرع فلسطين، اهلا وسهلا فيك. اهلا زكريا، كيفك خيي؟ بشكرك على الدعم الدائم، احد الممبرز بالقناة عنا. متوقع ما يكون في رفع، ما في رفع. حكيت هالشيء وعملت على تويتر. لا، عبد الله العنزي اهلا وسهلا فيك، كمان ممبر عنا. كيفك اخوي؟ بتمنى عليكم تعملوا لايك وسبسكرايب، هيك بتدعموا القناة، بتوصلوا، لأنه هيدا ستريم أنا عادة منه ما بعمله دايما. أهلا وسهلا فيك. إيه أكيد نعسان شوي، الساعة هون 4 وجه الضوء صراحة خيي. أهلا وسهلا تفضل. والله الزمان. كيفك خيي؟ كيف المعلم؟ أهلا وسهلا، وين اختفيت؟ هون هون. نشوف شو أي ساعة بلش هيدا. جميع آه، آه، ما بعرف ليه الانترنت عم. يعملش. ليش عمال تلعب الانترنت كثير؟ خلينا نبلش. انا بعد الحكي انا بتلاقي كلمه بينزل وكلمه بيطلع جيروم باول، الناس ده كل لحظه. الناس هذا الاس ام بي 500 هلا ما بعرف، في مشكلة مش بالصوت. افتروا معي ثانية خليني. يقطش ما بعرف ليه عم يقطع الانترنت عندي. خليني نشوفوا لي هلا صار احسن. في عنا في مشكلة كان بالانترنت، عملت ريست له، ما بعرف اذا هلا صار افضل. هل صار افضل؟ فيكم بس تعملوا لي كومنت. ان شاء الله. عملت ريست للمودم لانه كان في مشكلة بالإنترنت عم بيقطش. خلينا نشوف أي ساعة. بعد ما بلش صديقنا جيروم باول. البيتكوين حاليا 27,200. بعدها ما تذبذب، ما في شيء مهم صراحة. تذبذب حالي. الدولار كمان، قوة الدولار هبطت. الدولار الأمريكي شفنا صعود ورجع هبوط. دايما وقت يطلع قرار الفيدرالي بيكون في تذبذب وفي تلاعب كتير. لاحظوا ليكوا هالصعود ونرجع قباله دغري ثواني ببلش هبوط بالدولار. ما فيكم توثقوا دغري بقرار الفيدرالي لأنه في تلاعب كتير كان بالأسواق. بدنا ننتظر شوي قبل ما نعرف كيف رح تتصرف الأسواق من ناحية البيتكوين. أفضل. أوكي. نقمة جيروم باول. يلا يا جيروم يلا، تعال عنا خلينا نشوفك. بلاك روك قال امبارح انه ما احد اعضاء البلاك روك قالوا انه ما برايهم بقى رح يكون في زياده فوائد ابدا هيدي السنه. ابدا مش هالسنه بس، ولكن رح يكون في تثبيت للفايده على فتره اطول بكثير. كانوا متوقعين انه تثبيت الفايده بالنسبة عادة سلبي للأسواق لأنه الفايدة حاليًا كتير عالية، إذا رح تضلها عالية على فترة طويلة هذا يعني مثل بيقيم السيولة من الأسواق أكتر وأكتر، ولكن ما في زيادات جديدة للفوايد، هيك قال أحد أعضاء البلاك روك، أحد الأشخاص اللي بيشتغلوا ببلاك روك. بعد ما بلش البث تبع جيروم باول، هلا يعني بعد دقيقتين ببلش البث على جيروم باول. سامعيني؟ الو. لا اكيد بلاك روك مش صديقنا ابدا، وقايل لكم هالامر. اهلا وسهلا، اي لندن. يلا لنشوف، خليه يبلش جيروم شوي لنشوف شو بده يحكي. هلا الاجتماع بعد دقيقة. احمد الاجتماع بعد دقيقة. بعد دقيقة هلا، يعني لازم يبلش. وبلش، يلا. انا رح ترجم لكم على المباشر قد ما فيي، اوكي؟
Good afternoon, everyone.
اجا
My
وجه
colleagues and I
البوم.
remain squarely focused on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people.
بعدنا مركزين على
We understand the hardship that high inflation.
بعدنا مركزين على
Price stability is the responsibility of the
البطالة
Federal
وأرقام
Reserve.
التضخم العالي، وهدفنا
Without
نثبت
price
الأسعار.
stability, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong
إذا ما
labor
قدرنا
market
نثبت
conditions that
الأسعار ما
benefit
فينا
all.
نحسن الوضع الاقتصادي.
Since early last year, the FOMC has significantly tightened the stance of monetary policy. We've raised our policy interest rate by 5.25 percentage points and have continued to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace. We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our tightening have yet to be felt. Today, we decided to leave our policy unchanged and to continue to reduce securities holdings. Looking ahead, we're in a position to proceed carefully in determining the
من
extent
السنة
of
الماضية لهلا زدنا الفوائد كمية كبيرة، وبدنا نكمل، وقراراتنا رح تكمل بدنا نكمل حسب البيانات اللي رح تيجي لعنا. اوكي.
Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has been expanding at a solid pace. And so far this year, growth in real GDP has come in above expectations. Recent readings on consumer spending have been particularly robust. Activity in the housing sector has picked up somewhat, though it remains well below levels of a year ago, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment.
الفوائد عم بتأثر على الأسعار وعلى البزنسز، يعني اللي عندهم بزنس.
Okay. Participants expect growth to cool, with the median projection falling to 1.5% next year.
متوقعين تقدم الجروث، الزيادات تنزل لل 1.5% السنة الجاي بالجروث تبع البزنسز.
Strong pace that is nevertheless well below that seen earlier in the year. The unemployment rate ticked up in August but remains low at 3.8%.
البطالة بعدها منخفضة كتير على حاليا.
Moved up since late last year, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54 years. Nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year.
عدد الوظائف انخفض الموجود
gap has narrowed, labor demand still exceeds the supply of available workers.
ولكن بعده الطلب على الوظائف أعلى بكثير من العرض حاليا من عدد الموظفين الموجودين.
The median unemployment rate projection in the SEP rises from 3.8% at the end of this year to 4.1% over the next 2 years. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%, 4% over the 12 months ending in August, and that excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 3.9%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year.
من السنة الماضية انخفض شوي التضخم ولكن بعده عم يعلى. هلا مؤخرا لاعي شوي عالي شوي.
Of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. Nevertheless, the process of getting inflation sustainably down to 2%.
صراحة الحديث ذاته كل مرة ما في شيء مغير. هلا بدنا نشوف جواباته على أسئلة الصحفيين. كل شيء عم بيقوله، كل اجتماع بيقوله هو ذاته. بدنا ننتظر الأرقام، بعيد بعض الأرقام.
Actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship.
نحن بنعرف إنه التضخم عم بيأثر على الناس.
Higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective.
بعده هدفنا نرجع على 2%.
Earlier, since early last year, we have raised our policy rate by 5.25 percentage points.
من سنة الماضية هون علينا ل 5.5%.
Putting downward pressure on economic activity, hiring, and
هالأمر اللي عمل ضغط على الاقتصاد.
The economy is facing headwinds from tighter credit conditions for households and businesses. Range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our security.
حديثه حاليا مجد ثابت. ما عم بقول لكم بدنا ننتظر البيانات، عم نجرب قد ما فينا. هلا الأسئلة تبع الصحفية رح يطلعوا منه أكثر. هو عم يقرأ كلمة وكلمة شو متفقين عليه.
In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward. If the economy evolves as projected, the median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 5.6% at the end of this year, 5.1% at the end of 2024, and 3.9% at the end of 2025.
Okay.
Compared with our June summary of economic projections,
عم يحكي إنه معقول الفوائد كيف بدها تكون
by a half percentage point at the end of the next 2 years. These projections, of course, are not a committee's decision or plan. If the economy does not evolve as projected, the path of policy will adjust as appropriate.
حسب الاقتصاد رح نظبط القرارات تبعنا بحسب. بدنا نضلنا نعمل قراراتنا كل اجتماع بحسب المعطيات الموجودة وحسب البيانات اللي عم تجينا.
Given how far we have come, we are in a position to proceed carefully.
100% حسين. مثل ما بيقولوا ضربة على الحافر ضربة على المسمار، يعني عم بيطيبها من مال وعم بيضربها من مال.
But we are mindful of the inherent uncertainties in precisely gauging the stance of policy. We're prepared to raise rates further if appropriate, and we intend to hold policy at a restrictive level until we're confident that inflation is moving down sustainably.
بدنا نترك policies
additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time.
بشكرك على الدعم ماهر.
The committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal.
بيرجع مع مراوكب على 2%. هدفنا نوصل التضخم على 2%.
Keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored.
Oh.
It's essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country.
نحن بنعرف قراراتنا بتأثر على البزنسز والعالم.
We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price
ولكن رح
stability.
نعمل كل شيء بإيدنا لنوصل
I look forward
لأهدافنا.
to your questions.
بشكركم. هلا الأسئلة هي الأهم أنا برأيي صراحة.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. What makes the committee inclined to think that the Fed funds rate at this level is not yet sufficiently restrictive, especially when officials are forecasting a slightly more benign inflation outlook for this year? There's noted uncertainty about policy lags. Headwinds have emerged from the looming government shutdown, the end of federal childcare funding, resumption of student debt payments, things of that nature.
ليش برأيك
I would
إنه الفايدة منا عالية كافية؟
situation a little bit differently. So we decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate where it is.
قررنا نترك الفايدة، نثبت الفايدة.
While continuing to reduce our securities holdings. And we say we're committed to achieving and sustaining a stance of monetary policy.
وهدفنا نوصل لمحل ونثبت محل جيد لأسعار الفايدة وكل هالأمور.
But the fact that we decided to maintain the policy rate at this meeting doesn't mean that we've decided that we have or have not at this time reached that stance of monetary policy.
الفكرة إنه نحن ثبتنا الفايدة هلا ما بيعني إنه ما رح نزيدها ولا إنه لا ما رح نقللها. بدنا ننتظر البيانات.
It is more likely than not that it will be appropriate for us to raise rates one more time in the two remaining meetings this year.
في بعض الأعضاء بيقولوا بدهم يزيدوا الفايدة بعد مرة بالاجتماعين هيدي اللي عنا إياهم هالسنة. معقول؟ في بعض الأعضاء عم بيقولوا لا.
So right now it's still an open question about sufficiently restrictive. You're not saying today that we've reached this level.
We're not saying, no. Clearly, what we decided to do is maintain the policy rate and await further data. We want to see convincing evidence, really, that we have reached the appropriate level, and we're seeing progress, and we welcome that. But we need to see.
عم نشوف تقدم بس ما وهالشيء نحن متقبلين بس بدنا نشوف تقدم بعد أكثر لنوصل لهدفنا.
Just on the 2024 projections, what's behind that shallower path?
تقديراتكم لل 2024.
Rates to be 50 basis points higher.
Right. So I would say it this way. First of all, real interest rates are positive now. They're meaningfully positive.
لاحظوا التلاعب.
And that's a good thing. We
قلت لكم
need
أنا.
a policy to be
صعود
restrictive
هبوط رجعنا
so we
نفس
can get
المكان.
inflation down to target. Okay. And we're going to need that to remain to be the case for some time. So I think, remember that the
صعود وهبوط
SEP is not
ما
a
رح
plan
يسبق.
that is negotiated or discussed really as a plan. It's accumulation really. And what you see are the medians. It's accumulation of individual forecasts from 19 people. And then what you're seeing are the medians. So I wouldn't want to, bestow upon it the idea that that's really a plan. But what it reflects, though, is that economic activity has been stronger than we expected, stronger than I think everyone expected. And so what you're seeing is this is what people believe as of now will be appropriate to achieve what we're looking to achieve, which is progress toward our inflation goal, as you see in the SEP.
Thanks. Let's go to Rachel.
Hi, Chair Powell. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. How would you characterize the debate around another hike or holding steady? Is it discussion around lag times, fear of too much
كيف
slowing,
الحديث عن زيادة الفوائد؟
Walk us through what
كيف
this
عم
disagreement
بتصير
is
بين
about.
أعضاء الفيدرالية؟ كيف بتقيموا أنت؟
So the proposal at the meeting was to maintain our current.
الاقتراح بالاجتماع إنه نثبت الفايدة.
Obviously unanimous support for
والأغلب الناس قرروا هالأمر.
SEP meeting, and so people write down what they think, and you have some. You saw, I think 7 wrote down no hike at this meeting.
7 أعضاء قالوا ما بلا زيادة فوائد.
Another single hike in one of the next two meetings. that we have.
والباقي قالوا
So
إنه
it
بدهم
wasn't like we
زيادة
were
واحدة
arguing over
بالاجتماع
it, we were
المقبل.
just stating their positions. And really what people are saying is, let's see how the data come in. You know,
لا
we
شو
wanna
عم
see-
بيقولوا
we know we
الأعضاء إنه
wanna
خلينا
see- we
نشوف
wanna see that
المعطيات والبيانات اللي حتطلع من هلا
these
لوقتها
good
ونقرر
inflation
على
readings that we've been
هالأساس.
seeing for the last 3 months. We want to see that it's more than just 3 months, right? We want to see, you know, the labor market report that we received, the last one that we received, was a good example of what we do want to see. It was a combination of across a broad range of indicators, continuing rebalancing of the labor market. So those are the two things. Those are our two mandate variables, and that's the progress that we want to see. But I think people, they want to be convinced, you know, they want to be careful not to jump to a conclusion really one way or the other, but just be convinced that the data, you know, support that conclusion. And that's why, given how far we've come and how quickly we've come, we're actually in a position to be able to proceed carefully as we assess the incoming data and the evolving outlooks and risks and make these decisions meeting by meeting.
القرارات رح يعملوها
What
باجتماع
would- I know nothing's been
حسب
decided yet,
المعطيات.
What would one more hike at the end of the year do to the economy or to
شو
inflation?
رح
And on
تعمل
the other
زيادة
side,
إذا
what
زدنا
would
الفايدة بعد
no
مرة
hike
شو رح
would
تعمل
do to game
للاقتصاد؟
out for us?
So, you know, you can make the argument that one hike one way or the other won't matter, but for us, we're trying, we've obviously as a group, it's a pretty tight cluster of where we think that policy stance might be, but we're always going to be learning from data. You know, we've
يعني
learned
نحن
all
هلا
through
عم
the course
نراقب
of the last year
المعطيات
that
ورح نتعلم من
actually we need
المعطيات.
to go further than we had thought. If you go back a year and what we thought, what we wrote down, it's actually gotten higher and higher. So we don't really know and that's why, again, we're in a position to proceed carefully at this point. A year ago, we proceeded pretty quickly to get rates up. Now,
من سنة قدمنا بشكل كتير كبير ولكن هلا بدنا نراقب ونشوف.
it's just a question of reaching the right stance. I wouldn't attribute.
بدنا السؤال هو بدنا نوصل لمركز ثابت.
In macroeconomic terms, nonetheless, you know, we need to get to a place where we're confident.
لازم نوصل لمحل إنه عندنا الثقة إنه رح نقدر ننزل الفايدة ل 2% قبل ما نقلكم خلص ما بقى في زيادات فوائد أو نبلش ننقص. خفضنا السرعة اللي كنا عم نتحرك فيها لأنه بلشنا نشوف تحسن ولكن حسب المعطيات بدنا نضلنا نراقب المعطيات.
Steve Leishman, CNBC. Mr. Chairman, I want to return to Colby's question here. What is it saying about the committee's view of the inflation dynamic in the economy that
كيف عم بيشوف التضخم على تأثير التضخم على الاقتصاد؟
But need another half a point of the funds rate on it. Does it tell you that? Does it tell us that the committee believes inflation to be more persistent, requires more medicine effectively?
لأنه هلا عم بتقولوا في احتمال يزيدوا الفايدة بعد مرة، يعني هل برأيكم التضخم عم بيكون صعب more persistent أقوى لتحاربوه من ما كنتم متوقعينه ولا شو؟ على أي أساس عم تحكوا هيك؟
So I guess I would point more to, rather than pointing to a sense of inflation having become more persistent, I wouldn't think that's not, we've seen inflation be more persistent over the course of the past year, but I wouldn't say that's something that's appeared in the recent data. It's more about stronger economic activity, I would say. So
هو مش قصة التضخم، هو الحركة الاقتصادية أقوى كانت، هذا هو الخبر.
But I think broadly, stronger economic activity means rates. We have to do more with rates.
إذا الاقتصاد عم يقوى يعني بدنا نحرك الريتس أسعار الفوائد أكثر حتى نقدر نلجم التضخم. هذا من عنده مش من عندي هالمرة.
The economy reacts, and again, that's another reason why we're moving carefully now, because there are lags here. So that it may of course be that the neutral rate has risen. You do see people. You don't see the median moving, but you do see people raising their estimates of the neutral rate, and it's certainly plausible that the neutral rate is higher than the longer run rate. Remember, what we write down in the SEP is the longer run rate. It is certainly possible that that the neutral rate at this moment is higher than that, and that's part of the explanation for why the economy has been more resilient than expected.
Howard Schneider with Reuters. Thank you. So you
من
said several
رويترز
times
هذا.
that the economy needed a period of below trend growth to get inflation consistently back to 2%.
كنت عم تقول انه الاقتصاد بده مرحله اقل من مرحله نمو منخفضه اكثر لحتى نوصل للهدف تبعنا اللي هو 2%.
Does that represent a change in how you think inflation works, a change in how you think the economy works, a change in the mix of supply healing versus demand destruction that's necessary to achieve this?
Yes, of course, it is a good thing that we've seen
بدكم نرفع صوت باول.
meaningful rebalancing in the labor market without an increase in unemployment. And that's because we're seeing that rebalancing in other places, in, for example, job openings and in the jobs worker gap. You're also seeing supply side things. So that's happening. I would say, though, I still think, and I think broadly, people still think that there'll have to be some softening in the labor market.
عادة بعلي صوت باول بتقولوا لي بدنا الترجمة تبعك صوتك يكون أقوى مشان هيك أنا خفضته.
Which is a supply side thing, so that the gap between any given unemployment rate that's lower than that and the natural rate comes down. That's a way for supply. That's a way for the labor market to achieve a better balance. So all of those things are happening. You're right. In the median forecast, we don't see a big increase in unemployment. We do see an increase, and but that really is just playing forward the trends that we've been seeing. That is not guaranteed. There may come a time when unemployment goes up more than that, but that's really what we've been seeing.
صراحة عالم بتقول علي عالم بتقول وطي الصوت ما بعرف.
To boil that down for a second, we've gone from a very narrow path to a soft landing to something different. Would you call the soft landing now a baseline expectation?
No, I would not do that. I would just say, what would I say about that? I've always thought that the soft landing was a plausible outcome, that there was a path really to.
بعده الهدف هو يكون soft landing يعني هبوط طفيف للاقتصاد ولكن ما يكون في مثل ركود اقتصادي نوعا ما.
Ultimately, this may be decided by factors that are outside our control at the end.
ولكن هالامور يمكن تتاثر بامور يعني في كتير امور خارج ارادتنا بتاثر على هذا الامر.
I also think, by factors that are outside our control at the end of the day, but I do think it's possible, and I also think, this is why we're in a position to move carefully again. That
نحن بمركز لازم نمشي بطريقة منتبهين كتير يعني حتى ما نأثر بشكل كبير لا صعود ولا هبوط يعني نقدر نمشي مثل ما بيقولوا on eggshells بده يكون منتبه على كل حركة بيعملها وكل كلمة بيقولها.
The fact that we've come this far lets us really proceed carefully, as I keep saying. So I think that's the end we're trying to achieve.
بدنا نكون حذرين هذا اللي عم بيقول.
Not up to me to do that.
والله بينج بونج.
Nick Timmeros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, both you and Vice Chair Williams have indicated that sufficiently restrictive will be judged on a real rather than nominal basis, implying some scope for nominal rate cuts next year, provided further compelling evidence that price pressures will continue to subside. Is the FOMC focused on targeting a real level of policy restriction? And can you explain what would constitute enough evidence that will allow the FOMC to normalize the nominal stance of policy while keeping real policy settings sufficiently restrictive?
I mean, yes, we understand that it's a real rate that will matter and that needs to be sufficiently restrictive.
نحن بنعرف انه الريل ريت بده يكون
sufficiently restrictive only when you see it. It's not something you can arrive at with confidence in a model.
هذا ما انه رقم فينا نوصل له بطريقه واثقه. هذا بدنا نشوفه بالبيانات الاقتصاديه مع عده امور.
Pandemic-related demand and supply distortions and monetary policies work in suppressing demand or alleviating very high demand. The combination of those two things is actually working. You're seeing, inflation coming down. It's principally now in goods, also in housing services. You begin to see effects of it in non-housing services as well. So
البيتكوين ثابت نسبيا، عم نشوف تذبذبات يعني، ولكن نسبيا ثابت.
I think what, as we've said, we want to reach that. We want to reach something that we're confident it gets us to that level. And I think confidence comes from seeing, enough.
بدنا نوصل لمراحل يكون عندنا الثقة إنه رح نوصل نحن اللي بدنا إياه. هالاشياء بتجي خلال البيانات، ما فينا نقولها هلا، وحاليا لهلا بعد ما شفناها. السؤال بعدين بيصير قد ايه بدنا نضلنا رافعين الفوائد هالقد. بعد ما وصلنا انه لمنطقه، يعني هو عم بيقول بدنا نوصل لمنطقه نرتاح فيها، ساعتها بنقول لكم ما بقى في فوائد، وبعدين السؤال بيصير قد ايه بدنا نترك الفوائد عالي. يعني لهلا بعد ما قرر يوقف رفع الفائده. ما فيني بعد ما نزلت الترجمة العربية عليهم ما بقدر شغلها دغري حاليا، تاخد 24 ساعة قبل ما تقدر تنزل. The balance of risks and the other events that are happening out there. We take all of that into account. So I can't really answer a hypothetical about one piece of that. ما بقدر جاوب هذا. Trying to reach a judgment over whether we should move forward with another rate hike overall, and whether that would increase our confidence that yes, this is an appropriate move, and it will help us be more confident that we've gotten to the level that we need to get to. سيف بيقول له خلي الصحافي يسألوا بنشتري ولا بنبيع. بيقول لك اشتري وبيع جيروم باول، ما بتاخذ منه لا حق ولا باطل.
we see inflation kind of, again, to Nick's point, as we see inflation coming down, we're going to need to reduce interest rates to make sure that we're not squeezing the economy harder and harder over time. And I wonder if that's basically the logic that you apply. Is that how you think about it? And then I also wonder, in the last press conference, you said something to the effect of, it's a full year out, those discussions, and people interpreted that to mean that you didn't see a possibility of a rate cut in the first half of next year. And I wonder if that was what you meant by that, or whether, how you're thinking about that timing.
No, when I answer these questions about hypotheticals about cutting, I'm never intending to send a signal about timing. I'm just answering them as the question is expressed. So
أنا ما عم أقول إنه
I wouldn't want to be taken that way. Sorry, the first question was that how
إنه رح يكون في انخفاض بمعدلات الفوائد. ما حدا ياخذها، كان حدا عم يسألني سؤال جاوبت على قده، ما عم أقول في شيء منه.
Everything else we know about the economy and everything we know about monetary policy, the time will come at some point, and I'm not saying when, that it's appropriate to cut.
بوقت معين بالمستقبل، ما فيني أقول لكم إمتى رح نخفض الفوائد، ولكن إمتى ما حدا
think makes sense. No one will look back at this and say, "Hey, we made a plan." It's not like that at all. These are estimates made a year.
عم نشوف بس إنه هو عم يحكي البيتكوين شو عم يعمل صراحة.
Thanks so much, Chair Powell. Neil Irwin with Axios. I wonder, how do you think about the question of
سبب ما في حركة كبيرة يعني البيتكوين صعود ونزول بس، ولكن بمراكز معينة.
supply side factors, productivity, labor force growth, and relatedly, if GDP keeps coming in hot, even in the absence of inflation resurgence, would that on its own be a reason to consider more tightening?
So on your first question, I mean, we're looking at GDP very, very carefully to try to understand.
عم نطلع على ال GDP gross domestic product يعني.
It's a lot of consumer spending. The consumer's been very robust in spending.
الناتج الإجمالي المحلي بعتقد اسمه يعني.
That's how we're looking at it. Sorry, your second question was?
There's GDP stays hot, but without inflation.
So I think the question will be, GDP is not a mandate, right? Maximum employment and price stability are the mandates.
GDP منه شيء أمر بالنسبة لنا كتير مهم. السؤال الأساسي عنا إياها البطالة أو اليد العاملة اللي عم تشتغل، والبرايس ستابيليتي، تثبيت الاسعار. هذا هدفنا نحن.
You're expecting to see this improvement, continued rebalancing in the labor market and inflation moving back down to 2% in a sustainable way. We have to have confidence in that, and we'd be looking at GDP just to the extent that it threatens one or both of those.
Hi, Victoria Guida with Politico. There are multiple external factors that are playing out right now. We see rising oil prices. We
في
see
كتير أمور خارجة عن الإرادة مثل ارتفاع أسعار النفط، المظاهرات تبع اليد العاملة بالصناعة السيارات بأمريكا، هذا خاصة بفورد وجنرال موتورز.
There is a long list, and you hit some of them, but
أكيد في تأثير كبير عالمي.
Resumption of student loan payments, higher long-term rates, oil price shock. There are a lot of things that you can look at. And so what we try to do is assess all of them and
نحن بنجرب نطلع عليهم كلهم.
Around these things. I mean, to start with the strike. First of all, we absolutely don't comment on the strike, as we have no view on.
Strike هي مثل مظاهرة عم يعملوها اليد العاملة معامل السيارات بأمريكا. نحن ما بنعلق على الموضوع، ولكن أكيد بتأثر. كل هالأمور بتأثر. سألت عن النفط أخي سيف.
But that's really going to depend on how broad it is and how long it's sustained for, and then it also depends on how quickly production can make up for lost production. So none of those things are known right now. It's very
هدول كتير أمور ما فينا نعرف شو كيف تأثيرهم.
And we'll be learning, I think, over the course of the next intermeeting period. It hasn't traditionally had much of a macroeconomic effect. Energy prices being higher, that is a significant thing. Energy prices being up can affect spending. It can affect
أسعار النفط بتأثر على كتير أمور.
Energy prices can affect consumer expectations about inflation. We tend to look through short-term volatility and look at core inflation.
نحن بنجرب نطلع أكثر على الكور انفليشن، ولكن أكيد أسعار الطاقة رح تأثر بشكل كتير كبير وعم ننظر عليها.
Those are some of them. I'm not sure if I hit them all, but I mean, ultimately, you're coming into this with an economy that appears to have significant momentum, and that's what we start with. But we do have this collection of risks that you mentioned.
Torres from Bloomberg News. I was a little surprised, Chair Powell, to hear you say that a soft landing is not a primary objective.
تفاجأت وقتها قلت إنه السوفت لاندنج منه هدف أساسي. سوفت لاندنج إنه هبوط طفيف خفيف، ما يكون يعني مثل كراش. قال تفاجأت إنك قلت إنه هذا مش هدفك. هدفك بس.
And since inflation's coming down with strong GDP growth, we may have higher productivity. All are which good for the Fed's longer run target of low inflation. And if we lose that in a recession, aren't we opting for the awful hysteresis that we had in 2010? So are you taking this into account as you pursue policy? Thank you.
To begin, a soft landing is a primary objective, and I did not say otherwise.
أنا ما قلت إنه ما إنه هدف البرايمري أوبجكتيف، بس لصحح لك هيك عم بقول له.
The real point, though, is the worst thing we can do is to fail to restore price stability, because the record is clear.
أسوأ شيء بنقدر نعمله إنه ما نقدر نرجع ثبات الأسعار.
And you go through, you can have a long period where the economy is just very uncertain, and it'll affect growth. It'll affect all kinds of things. It can be a miserable period to have inflation constantly coming back and the Fed coming in and having to tighten again and again. So the best thing we can do for everyone, we believe, is to restore price stability.
أفضل شيء بنقدر نعمله هو نرد ثبات الأسعار price stability. هلا في عنا القدرة إنه نقدر نكون حذرين ونمشي على مهلنا.
The benefits of being able to continue what we see already, which is rebalancing in the labor market and inflation coming down without seeing an important large increase in unemployment, which has been typical of other tightening cycles. So
hi, thank you. Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. When you look at the disinflation that has taken place so far, do you see it mostly as a result of what some economists are calling the low-hanging fruit, such as the unwinding of supply chain snarls and other pandemic disruptions, or is it more a broad disinflationary trend?
وقت تشوف انخفاض بالتضخم اللي شفناه مؤخرا.
Thank you. So if I understood your question, I would say it this way. I think we knew from before when we lifted off, but certainly by the time we knew that bringing inflation back down was going to take, as I call it funding. In addition, monetary policy was going to help. It was going to help supply side heal by cooling demand off. And just in general, better aligning supply with demand. So those two forces were always going to be important. It's very hard to pull them apart. They work together. I do think both of them are at work now, and I think they're at work in a way that shows you the progress that we are seeing.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television and Radio. In June, you forecast a 5.
كان عم بيقول له بشهر 6 عملت تقديرات
What would justify that last move? Because the median forecast is for lower inflation. And given all the known unknowns that you face, how much confidence do you have, can investors have, or the American people have in your forecasts?
Well, forecasts are highly uncertain. Forecasting is very difficult. Forecasters are a humble lot with much.
forecasting يعني التقديرات ما في الواحد يقول يوصلها 100%. اوكي انا كنت قايل انه عندي تقديرات غير، ولكن معطيات بتيجي جديده بدنا نمشي عليها، ما في حدا يكون 100%.
Unemployment, you also see that the ultimate unemployment rate is not as high, but that's really because of what we've been seeing in the labor market. We've seen more and more progress in the labor market without seeing significantly higher unemployment. So
يعني عم نشوف تقدم بمجال الليبر ماركت، سوق اليد العاملة، ولكن سوق العمل، ولكن بطالة ما عم نشوف كثير فيه، ما عم تتأثر.
You're looking at really significant declines in core inflation, largely in the goods sector, also to some extent in housing services, and just a little in non-housing services. Those are the three buckets. Headline inflation, of course, has come way down, largely due to lower energy prices, some of which is now reversing. So
headline inflation التضخم العام شفنا انخفاض فيه بسبب انخفاض اسعار النفط، ولكن هذا عم يرجع يقلب هلا مع صعود اسعار النفط هلا.
These are our forecasts. We have very high quality people working on these forecasts, and I think they stand up well against other forecasters. But just the nature of the business is the economy is very difficult to forecast.
Given the forecast that you have, what justified not moving today, and what could justify moving in the future if you think?
شو اللي سبب انه ما تزيدوا الفوائد هلا، وشو اللي رح يعطيكم سبب انكم تزيدوا الفايده بالمستقبل؟ نحن زدنا الفايده بشكل كثير كبير اول شيء، ولكن هلا عم نقرب لمرحله انه هذا هيك لازم يكون الوضع الاقتصادي او الوضع الفايده، صار فينا نراقب اكثر هلا.
That becomes more equal, and I think that the natural common sense thing to do is as you approach that, you move a little more slowly as you get closer to it, and that's what we're doing.
بشكرك أخي وائل.
We're taking advantage of the fact that we
بشكرك على الدعم.
to move a little more carefully now as we sort of find our way to the right level of restriction that we need to get inflation back down to 2%.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Jennifer Schonberger with Yahoo Finance. With your focus on year-over-year PCE, isn't it true that base effects are huge, and that by the time you meet in November, that it's more likely that you'll have a low PCE number that would make you feel more comfortable? And secondly, how would the lack of key indicators like CPI, the jobs report, impact your approach in upcoming meetings?
عم تحكي عن أرقام التضخم، كيف معقول تأثر على قراراتك بالاجتماع المقبل؟
What factors?
The base factors.
Base factors. Okay. So On that, we're looking at just monthly, right? You can look at just monthly readings and see what the increase was from the prior month. So you're right. When you go back 3, 6, and 12 months, you get base factors, but we can adjust for that. In terms of not getting data, again, we don't comment on government shutdowns. It's possible if there is a government shutdown and it lasts through the next.
إذا شفنا government shutdown هلا government shutdown بخصوص الإنفاق في حديث عنه معقول تغلق الدولة لأنه ما عم قال لهم إذا صار شيء أكيد رح يكون سلبي بدنا نتعاطى معه حسب ما يصير ما فيني أعرف أنا. بشكرك أخي ناصر كمان.
Yes, I mean, if you're looking, if we can tell how much inflation has gone up in a given month, right? And that's what we're looking at. And month by month, what's the reading? And
بدنا ننتظر فينا ننظر للتضخم شهر بعد شهر.
Maturities, but they're incredibly volatile and they can be misleading. That's why we look at 12 months. But I think in this
هلا بس ولكن معقول يكونوا يضيعونا لذلك بنطلع أكثر أفضل على 12 شهر.
at 6 months and even 3 months, but really 6 months inflation. So you're looking at it over that period and over longer periods. That's the right way to go. And we don't need to be in a hurry in getting to a conclusion about what to do. We can let the data evolve.
Thanks for the question, Chair Powell. Edward Lawrence with Fox Business. So I want to focus back in on oil prices. We're seeing oil prices, as you mentioned, move up.
عم نشوف ارتفاع بأسعار النفط. كيف عم بيأثر على قرارك برفع الفوائد ولا لا؟ هلا أنه شفنا آخر مرة إنه التضخم العام ارتفع. هي سؤال مهم.
It certainly can affect consumer sentiment. I mean, gas prices are one of the big things that affects consumer sentiment. It really comes down to how persistent, how sustained these energy prices are. The reason why we look at core inflation, which excludes food and energy.
السبب إنه نطلع على التضخم الأساسي يعني اللي هو بلا الطاقة.
Energy prices mostly don't contain much of a signal about how tight the economy is, and hence don't tell you much about where inflation's really going. However, we're well aware, though, that if energy prices increase and stay high, that'll have an effect on spending.
إذا النفط ارتفع وأسعار الطاقة ارتفعت ضلت عالية، هالشيء رح يعلم على مدى طويل، هالشيء رح يأثر على التضخم بشكل عام أكيد.
They're putting more and more of this on their credit card. The consumer seeing record credit spending. How long do you think the consumer can manage that debt at higher interest rates now? And are you concerned about a debt bubble related to that?
من عنده هو هذا اللودينج من عندهم هن مش من عندي أنا. خلينا نشوف شو عم بيصير خلينا نشوف شو عم بيصير بالتشارت البيتكوين.
To finish my prior thought, I was saying that's why we tend to look through energy moves.
بشكرك وائل مرة تانية. سعر البيتكوين
that we can see as short-term volatility. Turning to consumer credit, of course we watch that carefully. Consumer
قوة الدولار صعدت، سعر البيتكوين انخفض هون.
quite recently, after
هيدي قوة الدولار الأمريكي رجعت على مراكز المرتفعة.
watching that carefully, but at this point, these readings are not, they're not at
بشكرك خيي
levels. They're
عن جد
moving
بشكرك.
back up to what was typical in the pre-pandemic era.
Hi, Jean Young with M&I Market News. Yields along the Treasury curve have risen to their highest in years. What is the Fed's view about what's been driving that increase in recent weeks? And how much of it can be attributed to macro explanations and how much to technical factors?
So you're right. Rates have moved up significantly. I think it's always hard to say precisely, but it's most people do a common decomposition of the increase, and the view will be it's not mostly about inflation expectations. It's mostly about other things, either term premium or real yields, and it's hard to be precise about this. Of course, everyone's got models that'll give you a very precise answer, but they give you different answers. So, but essentially, they're moving up because it's not because of inflation. It's because it'll probably have something to do with stronger growth. I would say more supply of treasuries. The common explanations that you hear in the markets kind of make sense.
هاي عم يحكي عن أسباب ارتفاع التضخم وهالأمور ماشيين.
Kyle Campbell, American Banker. Thank you for taking the questions. Just two on housing. You said slower shelter cost growth is in the pipeline and will.
بالنسبة لأسعار المنازل والتضخم وتأثير فيه عليها.
Questions out there about the way housing costs are measured, particularly the.
عم يحكي عن أسعار البيوت وكيف عم بيتم مقارنتها.
Homes would rent for if they were in the rental market.
بشيء له علاقة بالاقتصاد الأمريكي.
How much of the effort to tame inflation, both as it's measured and felt by the broader public, hinges on housing supply? And then, as far as a constrained housing supply being sort of exacerbated by this.
عم يحكي عن عدد الطلب تبع المنازل بالولايات المتحدة وكل هالأمور. خليني هو عم يحكي نطلع شوي على الشارت البيتكوين شو عم بيصير فيها.
So on the supply point, of course, supply is very important over time in
الدولار أب الدولار شوي الدولار الأمريكي. قوة الدولار الأمريكي وقت أقول دولار أمريكي أنا عم بحكي عن الدكسي. خلينا نطلع على S&P 500 نسبيا هبط. هلا شايفين ارتداد ولكن هبط. البيتكوين هبط بشكل عام. مرحلة عرضية هلا بالسوق مملة. يمكن نشوف هبوط يمكن نشوف بس مرحلة ملل هلا بالسوق المرحلة حاليا.
Housing services inflation coming down. Your second question was the lock-ins. How much is that affecting things, really?
Is that going to affect your decisions to potentially bring rates down to their lower bound in the future, sort of creating that sort of bubble of buying and then a lock-in that sort of stagnates the housing market?
I think I would look at the lock-in. The idea being that people are in very low rate mortgages, and even if they want to move now, it would be hard because the new mortgage would be so expensive. Play a role in our future decisions in a future loosening cycle about whether we would cut rates. No, I don't think it would. I mean, I don't think
ما رح يأثر علينا إذا بدنا نخفض أسعار المنازل وكل شيء. هالأمور ما رح تأثر على قرارنا إذا بدنا نخفض الفائدة بعدين. قرار تخفيض الفائدة رح يكون له أمور أخرى لازم نطلع عليها.
You have to cut rates to the point that you have to do what you can to support the economy. So I wouldn't think that would be a reason for us not to do that. It's not something we're thinking about at all right now, but down the road, I wouldn't think so.
Hi, Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. Chair Powell, you've mentioned several things that would possibly weigh on consumer confidence, maybe cut back consumer spending, possible government shutdown, high gas prices. At this point, would the Fed welcome
عم يحكي عن ثقة المستهلك ارتفاع
get inflation closer to your 2% target?
I wouldn't say it that way. We're not looking for a decrease in consumer spending.
ما عم ننظر لانخفاض بصرف المستخدم.
It's been able to hold up under the tightening that we've done. It's a good thing that the labor market's strong. The only concern, and it just means this: if the economy comes in stronger than expected, that just means we'll have to do more in terms of monetary policy to get back to 2%.
إذا الاقتصاد شفنا كان إنه قوي لدرجة في صعود، يعني لازم نشتغل أكتر نحن لحتى نخفض التضخم. ولكن إذا انخفض بكون شغلنا عم يمشي.
I mean, concern number one is restoring price stability, because in the long run, that's something we have to do so that we
هدفنا الأول نرد ثبات الأسعار price stability.
conditions that benefit all, as I've said a couple times. So
سوق العمل هول الاثنين دائما عم
that said, of course, you know, we also now, given how far we've come with our rate hikes and how quickly we've come here, we do have the ability to be careful as we move forward because of that consideration.
البيتكوين انخفض ل 26,800 حاليا.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Simon Rabinovich with The Economist. One of the factors in the economic resilience to date appears to be a lesser degree of rate sensitivity than in the past.
26,000
Obviously, we
البيتكوين
talk about households
والدولار
with long
صعب.
fixed rate mortgages, also companies that refinanced before last year. What is your thinking about the efficacy of rates and how that's changed? And then related to that, how do you think about the distributional consequences in the sense that if you're a relatively whereas if you're relying on your credit card for supporting your consumption, time are getting offered.
The economy's been stronger than many expected, given what's been happening with interest rates. Why is that? Many candidate explanations. Possibly a number of them make sense. One is just that household balance sheets and business balance sheets have been stronger than we had understood, and so that spending has held up and that kind of thing. We're not sure about that. The savings rate for consumers has come down a lot. The question is whether that's sustainable. That it could just mean that the date of effect is later. It could also be that for other reasons, the neutral rate of interest is higher for various reasons. We don't know that. It could also just be that policy hasn't been.
ما بتاخذ منه لا حق ولا باطل والله الزلمة.
There are many.
الفكرة الأساسية إنه رح يترك الفوائد مرتفعة لفترة طويلة، هذا مؤكد. هل رح يزيد رفع الفائدة مرة ثانية؟ لهلا ما في شيء مؤكد. عم بيقول بحسب المعطيات.
By many forecasts, many forecasts call for growth to moderate over the course of the next year. So that's where we are, and you know we have to deal with what comes. On your second question your second question was distributional, but can you be a little clearer about that?
سؤالك الثاني كان شيء عن التوزيع.
Yeah, my point there was that if you're somebody who has a long fixed rate mortgage, you've been able to endure.
إذا أنت شخص عندك أسعار فايدة مثبتة،
financing rates are punitive.
الأسعار الفايدة الحالية كتير مرتفعة ومأزية.
We're trying to get inflation back down.
الهدف الأساسي عندنا تخفيض التضخم.
People who are on a fixed income. If you're a person who spends all of your income, you don't really have any meaningful savings. You spend all your income on the basics of life: clothing, food, transportation, heating, the basics. And prices go up by 5, 6, 7%. You're in trouble right away. Whereas even middle class people have some savings and some ability to absorb that. So it is for those people, as much as for anybody, that we need to restore price stability. And we want to.
ما عجبني جايبه. هلا عم بيقول إذا أنت عندك دخل محدود وارتفعت الأسعار 5% أكيد رح تنزعج. هذا نحن كرمالك رح عم نخفض، بدنا نجيب ثبات الأسعار، ولكن هالأمر ما بيعني شيء. لأنه إذا أنت ما عندك أموال وارتفعت الأسعار، أجراتك رح ترتفع، كل شيء رح ترتفع ومدخولك محدود، رح تأثر على الشعب كله. يعني ما بعرف صراحة، يعني ما.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Greg Robb from MarketWatch.
In the beige book recently, you can tell that the Fed has been
البيج
surveying
بوك الكتاب الفيدرالي البيج بوك.
community groups about the economic health of low-income Americans, moderate with Americans. I have two questions about this. Are you going to use that data to maybe come up with sort of like a quarterly survey of those groups, like the senior loan officer survey?
بهذا الكتاب حكيوا مع low income people يعني عالم ذو دخل محدود عملوا survey مثل عملوا دراسة عليهم. هلا هالشيء رح تكمل فيه أنت ورح يأثر على قراراتك.
Just want to get your sense of the health of that sector. Thank you.
So I don't know about the quarterly survey. That's an idea we can take away and think about. In terms of how low and moderate Americans, they're clearly were suffering from high inflation. I think during the pandemic, the government transfers that happened were very meaningful. And if you know the surveys that we take showed that that low and moderate income people were actually in very, very strong financial condition. I think now it's a very hot labor market, and you're seeing high nominal wages, and you're starting to see real wages are positive by most measures. So I think overall households are in good shape.
بفترة البانديميك والإغلاق الدولة دعمت بشكل كتير كبير العالم وخاصة ذو الدخل المحدود. ولكن عندك هلا في كتير في سوق العمل كتير حامي يعني فيهم العالم يشتغلوا بطريقة ما تانية عم بيقول لهم.
That's kind of a guess at what the answer might be, but I think there's a lot of good things happening on household balance sheets, and certainly in the labor market and with wages. The biggest wage increases having gone to relatively low wage jobs, and now inflation coming down, you're seeing real wages, which is a good thing. Thanks very much.
بشكركم. alright. هذا هو أعطينا حكي اللي بده يحكيه، لعب بالأسواق وفل. يعني تلاعب ذبذبات مثل ما بقول لكم. بعدنا بمراكز تقريبا زي تأكيد خفضنا تحت 27 شيء بسيط، ولكن كنا نحن على أول 27 بلشنا فيه. في تلاعب. المشكلة الأساسية بعتقد قوة الدولار الأمريكي عم يقوى. بدنا نشوف ارتداد له وأسواق البورصة التقليدية. بدنا نشوف كيف بدهم يتقبلوا كلمات جيروم باول اللي هو حكي أكثر عن إنه رح يطول برفع الفائدة لمدة أطول. وهذا هو يعني ما في شيء أساسي رح متغير. بدنا نشوف الأسواق كيف تتقبل كلامه. هذا المهم. خلينا نجاوب على بعض الأسئلة. سألنا أحد الأشخاص عن عملة ICP. ICP أخي أنا أول ما طلعت كنت ضدها لأنه مشروع كتير صعب يتم تطبيقه، ولكن مؤخرا عم بسمع عم يعملوا شغل مهم. ما تعمقت فيها، ولكن عم بسمع أشياء جيدة عنها مؤخرا. بدنا ننتظر ونشوف. أكيد ماني عامل دراسة متعمقة فيها، لا أحكيك صراحة. يعني أول ما طلعت كنت أنا ضدها، ما حبيت الفريق والمشروع وطريقة تصريفهم على العالم. تم تصريف كميات هائلة. ولكن هلا عم بسمع من أكثر من شخص بوثق فيهم بالدول الغربية مثل كوتش كي محلل معروف. كثير عم بيقولوا لي في شغل كثير كبير عم بيصير عليه. ما بعرف أنا شخصيا، لا بس هذا مش نصيحة استثمارية ولا شيء. هاي غير هيك الذهب أنا برأيي رح نشوف صعود بالذهب. هلا في مشاكل بالعملات، كل العملات يعني العملات التقليدية والعملات مع جميع العملات المالية العالمية، يعني من الدولار للين لليورو للكل هول في مشاكل بهالعملات. لذلك برأيي الذهب رح يصعد، رح يكون عليه طلب ورح يصعد. وعلى الأرجح البيتكوين نفس الشيء مع الوقت كمان. عملة كاسبا أنا والله هجموني كثير لأني حكيت عن كاسبا مؤخرا. كاسبا أنا حاليا ما بدخل فيها، مش لأنه هي عاطلة، ولكن أنا شخصيا هلا ما بدخل بكاسبه لانه صعدت كميه كتير كبيره بفتره كتير وجيزه. هذا اللي صار. حتى عملت تويت على بدوي _trade انا مثلا عن عملة انجكتيف، مشروع كتير جيد انجكتيف، وعم عمل تطوير صراحه رائع. انا لفتني نظري التطوير اللي عمله انجكتيف كتير. وين هو هون؟ هذا التطوير حكيت عنه، ولكن قلت لكم تسالوني هل هي صالحه للاستثمار؟ بالرغم من انه مشروع جيد وهذا وتطوير كتير مهم عملوه، لانه صار انتر اوبرابل مع كوزموس مع سولانا وايثيريوم. هذا شيء كتير جديد وكتير مهم، ولكن صعدت السنه بس 450%. انا عندي قاعده بمشي عليها، ما بعمل فومو وما بدخل على صعود كتير. هلا قلت لكم امبارح تم التواصل مع اعضاء الفريق واذا مهتمين فيني اعمل مقابله مع احد اعضاء فريق انجكتيف يفسرنا عن التطوير اكثر ونحكي معه. اذا بهمكم الامر اكيد بعمل معه مقابله. ايفاكس عم تشتغل، بعدها عم تشتغل، عملت عده شراكات مهمه. ايفاكس عندها الجيمنج اللي هو سايد تشينز بتستخدمهم للجيمنج وهالامور. برايي ايفاكس رح تكون مش رح تضلها معنا على فتره. قال صراحة بعد مشاكل أصحاب الشركة تخانقوا مع بعضهم وهن ما هي مركزية بشكل كتير كبير. قال هيدا هالأمر رح يأثر عليها بشكل كتير كبير. قد ايه رح تمد المحاكمات، قد ايه رح يصير المشاكل. مع أنا صراحة خارج قالها كليا. الجوراند عملة جيدة، ولكن مؤخرا بعد ما اعلن انه جاري جانسلر انه هي سكيورتي، وبعد ما يعني شفنا خوف كتير كبير من مجتمع الجو. ما عم نشوف التطور اللي حابين نشوفه. ضروري نشوف تقدم اكثر فيها صراحه ويكون عندها ماركتينج اكثر. هلا البير ماركت كله بينفضح بالبير ماركت، ولكن كمشروع هي جيده. زكريا مؤتمر كوزموس. اوكي انت احد الرابحين بعتقد. مؤتمر كوزموس بعده جاي. رح توصلكم التيكتس. حكيته لباسل امبارح انا عن الموضوع. رح توصل التيكتس للجميع قبل تقريبا باسبوع لانه مش هو بيبعتهم، تبع المؤتمر بيبعتون لكل العالم. رح توصل اللي ربحوا. عند 3 اشخاص ربحوا على مؤتمر كوزموس بتركيا. رح توصلكم قبل باسبوع من المؤتمر. هيك بس ضبطوا اموركم لتقدروا تروحوا 100%. اكد لي بصير 100% بتوصلكم، بس دائما بيرسلوا التيكتس على الايميلات تبعكم قبل باسبوع من المؤتمر. ضلكم مطلعين عليه. فينوم شو رأيك؟ فينوم صراحة هي بعتقد مبنية على كوزموس. أنا كنت عم بعمل التاسكس لآخذ الاير دروب، وعملت فيديو عنهم شي لأول 3 تاسكس أو 4 تاسك. صراحة ما عاد معي وقت مؤخرا، كنت مشغول كتير. ما عاد معي وقت. بدي أرجع كفي وأعمل فيديوز غير عنهم. زيد الفيديوز الكفي المهمات للمجتمع. ولكن مثل ما أنا شايفها مشروع لفت لي نظري صراحة فينوم. اوكي اخي زكريا، انت لك 10 سنين باسطنبول. والله حابب ازور. انا بعد ما زرت تركيا حابب ازور، وعايز وقايلين اللي عم بيقولوا لي لروح مع كوزموس، احضر مؤتمر كوزموس هونيك. سو ما لنشوف شو بده يصير معي. ساند بوكس مشروع جيد كامل. كمال منصور في تمويل كتير كبير. حتى السعوديه عملت استثمارات بكوزموس بشكل كتير كبير. اخواتي انا ما رح طول صراحه. عيوني عم بيغمضوا. الساعه عندي متاخر كثير. الوقت عندي حاليا انا 5:30 صارت توجه الضوء هلا. بشكركم على كل شيء. بتمنى منكم تدعموا القناه بلايك وسبسكرايب، وانا بشوفكم قريبا في فيديو جديد وماركت ابديت جديد.